All right. It says we are live in the upper left-hand corner, so I'm going to take its word for it and trust that we are live. Welcome back, everybody. It is Saturday, June 19th of 2021. As I like to say every week, how did it get so late so soon? But here we are, and I'm really glad to be here. As people are trickling in right now, I'll do my job to do my introductions of myself and our wonderful guests. So my name is Par. Well, good morning, Jim. I like saying good morning to you first and foremost. You always beat everyone to the punch. My name is Param. I have a master's degree in marriage and family therapy. I'm a licensed advanced alcohol and drug counselor. I'm also a high school basketball coach, and I'm the facilitator of this family education and support group, if you will, on a weekly basis at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And it's wonderful what it's become. So the premise of this was never meant to be online. It was something that we were doing at Buckeye Recovery Network. Families were coming over, and I was trying to do some education and do some groups for them. And the pandemic hit, so we did what we could do and went to the world of social media and Facebook and YouTube, which worked out wonderfully because now we've been able to capture a lot more families and provide education and support to them. So last week, this is part 2 of a 2-part series. So last week, we had myself and the gentleman in the middle of the screen, Mr. Ed, and Ed is one of our alumni. And at the end of this conversation, I'm going to share about a new role and capacity that he's going to have at Buckeye Recovery Network. But Ed is one of our alumni, and he came and shared his experience, strength, and hope. And the reason why his talk was so valuable for many was because he had a relapse after about 11 months of continued sobriety, which we titled it the rise after the fall, because since that relapse, he's doubled down on his recovery and been able to accumulate 14 months of continuous sobriety after that. So it was a very important message for people to hear and to learn and to understand that a relapse is often a part of the recovery process. In the same way that the addiction is progressive, recovery can be progressive too. So sometimes people can pick up where they left off with the recovery, learn from the fall, but then pick up where they were going. So the intention of this week is to have his mother, Lynn, which is the person next to Ed over there on. And Lynn, just a few things about her. She's been a very avid family education support follower, and she's been there from the beginning. She's very engaged and kind of talks on the side chats and just a pleasure to be around. But the reason she keeps coming back is she said she started to feel like she wasn't alone in this process. And that's if I can get that takeaway from any mom or dad that watches this thing, that's gold right there. So today's talk, I'll have you guys just kind of do a little, good morning, hello, and stuff like that. I want to go through the timeline that we went through with Ed last week, however, from his mother's eyes and his mother's perspective, because as you'll quickly learn is that the world is happening and there's multiple different perspectives that are occurring within that reality. And a mom's perspective is completely different than Ed's perspective, because the individual using drugs and alcohol going through their process is oftentimes comfortably numb with their addiction. However, there is no such thing as comfortably numb with a family member. They are feeling all of their emotions. They're feeling it all on a night to night basis. And sometimes the individual that's under the influence is either in denial of that or doesn't want to accept that reality because it's so painful. So Lynn, start us off. How are you? Good morning. Thank you for being here.
Good morning. You're very welcome. Happy to be here.
Right on. Yeah, it's I'm really looking forward to hearing not just obviously we're going to get into the good stuff too, but I do want to hear some of the painful stuff too, because it's your truth, And Ed, welcome back. Is it good to be back? You got a different color shirt today, right?
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be back. Absolutely. A different color shirt and a haircut.
Yeah, you got like the millennial pink. Last week you had like the millennial purple. You're like really hip to the colors. I think I got to pick it up. I often show up in my best black. So yeah. So all right, Lynn. So let's start off. I'll tell you where Ed started off his story last week. And ironically, it was not created that way. The day that we were doing our talk happened to be 20 years of Ed's father passing away.
Yeah, it was unbelievable.
I couldn't believe it. Yeah, it was. Ed told me that morning. He's like, Parham, it's like, I don't know if it's a coincidence. 20 years ago today, my dad passed away. I was like, oh my gosh, like I was not expecting that. So Ed at that point in his life was 13, 14 years old.
Like 14 and a half. He was a freshman, I believe, in high school.
Okay, so tell me, and he identified that even though he said his drinking, using didn't like spiral out of control at that point, but he does remember suppressing emotions and not talk about it and stuff like that, especially with his group of peers, and I'm assuming with family. But he
Right.
said that drugs and alcohol at that time like really helped him kind of cope, even if he didn't really know that's what it was doing. But tell me from your perspective, was that a big shift in in Ed's development that you noticed at the time? Kind of fill us in, because there are some people that lose loved ones at a young age also.
Yeah, I did notice a big shift, and I tried, getting him to open up to me and trying to get him into different therapies, but he just had no interest at all. He suppressed everything, and no matter who it was that spoke to him, he just didn't want to deal with the feeling, of losing his dad. And I heard him last week say that he looked right in the doctor's eyes, and the doctor said everything's going to be fine. And I can see how that would, Ed is the type that he believes what you say. So that had to be like crushing. And I mean, I lost my dad in 2002, and and my mom more recent than that. I just can't imagine at that age to lose a parent, how hard it was for him.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And for those of you who are watching right now, the moment that she's referring to, Ed, can you just take us back to that moment when the doctor looked you in the eye and shared with you about your dad's prognosis?
I think it went something along the lines of, that he had this stomach cancer, but there was like a new type of treatment. I think it was stem cell research or stem cell treatment at the time. And it was groundbreaking, and they were going to save him, and he was going to come out on the other end, better and stronger. And, that's not what happened, but I took his word for it, being 14, 15 years old, something like that. You hear those words from a doctor, and you trust in the doctor, right? You trust that what the doctor's saying, especially at that young of an age, that what he's saying is true. And I believed him.
Absolutely. And for everyone else that's watching this, what that leads to is a distrust at the time. Even if it's a 14-year-old, 15-year-old coming up with that decision, it leads to distrust with other human beings down the line, counselors, therapists, clinicians, mentors, saying, hey, if you're going to be okay, like everything's going to be all right. Like, hey man, I know that's what you're saying, but I don't really trust what you have to say. It really breaks a human being's trust. And that's something that I know, Ed, you have to work on. Is I do know that you trust certain people in your life right now, but if I would have rewinded the tape back 24 months ago when you got out here, it couldn't say you trusted everyone you met.
I didn't trust anybody. In fact, when I first came out here, the people were so nice to me, and I'm like, well, what does this guy want from me? Like, why are you being so nice?
Yeah. So thank you for taking us back there. So Lynn, tell me about the progression. So as Ed was, 15-year-old freshman in high school, because Ed shared about his progression from his perspective, going into prescription medication. Prescription medication almost always inevitably leads to harder, illicit substances. But tell me from your perspective, how was that progression going? Were you aware of it as a mom? And just fill us in with whatever you want.
I wasn't aware of all of it at the time. Some of it, yes, I was aware of, the drinking and the marijuana smoking. But my biggest, I guess you could say, it was a little bit of a guilt trip that I went through too, because he lost his father at that age. I think that I tried to overcompensate and catch him before he hit the ground with everything, no matter what it was, with schoolwork, with sports, with, a job, with whatever. So I kind of he lost his dad. So, okay, a lot of his friends are smoking the pot or drinking on the weekends or whatever. So I did know that was happening. And then a couple years later, I had I think it was one of his girlfriends actually tell me that, Ed does cocaine. And I was like, please, and no, don't tell me Ed does cocaine. I don't believe you. And then it was like, yeah. And then one day Ed came home, and I guess it was a couple of years after his dad had passed, and he was like, "Mom, I did cocaine, and like I'm having heart palpitations," and I'm like, "Oh my God, what do I, like what do I do?" And I'm like, "Well, take a bath," and I was like, "How could you do cocaine? Like, why are you doing this to yourself? Like I can't comprehend how someone would want to, do that and not know what could happen to them, the effects of the drug." And I guess after that, I just saw it getting like the older he got, because high school to me, it wasn't that bad. I mean, it was bad, but we were able to get through high school. He graduated, he played sports, it was later on. It was, later on that it really, really, like the decision making as far as not only friends, but girlfriends that he was with got, really bad too. So, and
one thing I noticed from what you said is as a result of you said it was guilt. So a lot of your behaviors were based on the guilt that you were experiencing because Ed lost his father. This also happens in the same age demographic, kids that are younger, older. With sometimes when the parent goes away to like incarceration, this also happens with divorce, separation. One of the family members tends to overcompensate because of the wounds that are left because of that. And death is obviously the ultimate one of those. So this isn't unique. What you've done is actually something that a lot of family members tend to do after there's a break in the family unit.
Right.
What happened was because you overcompensate, you tried to catch him before he falls all the time. That creates the cycle, which I'm sure you are aware of now, which the enabling and codependency, which goes hand in hand with addiction. So even with our best intentions, like I want to protect my son from experiencing any more pain, whether it's with education, with finances, with whatever it is, you're trying to save him. By default, you're actually unknowingly at the time fanning the flame of addiction, right? It's like fanning the flame of addiction, and it's creating the environment for addiction to actually start to rev up a little bit,
Exactly.
And, you might have done that at 14, 15 years old, but all of a sudden Ed's 24, 25, 28 years old, and he's still being treated out of that same guilt of your wound of the child. So, Ed, do you consciously know that your mom was doing things for you out of her guilt, or was this something that in your mind wouldn't make sense at the time?
No, I did not know that.
Yeah.
It didn't make sense at the time.
Well, especially when I heard him say that he felt he had to be the man of the family, at that point. And I think, my God, at 14, 15, how can you be the man? Like I was working and it was extremely difficult, but, that he had that much pressure on him, was in the back of my mind too, that he felt that, he had to take over. Plus, I mean, my family's been through a lot of heartache and death. I mean, Ed lost 2 cousins, an uncle, I mean, grandparents, and it like progressed. It wasn't, I mean, there was maybe 2 years where every 6 months we lost someone. So, besides that, I think, like losing his cousins was very hard for Ed. And, I think that all added to it too.
Yeah. Yeah. And most children at that age, when their family members are operating out of because what happens is, let's say if you're smoking pot with your friends, right? And your mom's like, well, everyone's doing it, it's okay. They start to do these things called rationalize. They start to justify. It's all the same stuff we do, Ed, as people that struggle with addictions. Have you noticed how when you take a certain behavior and you like justify that it's okay, it's like I know I shouldn't be doing this, but it's okay type stuff.
Yeah.
Because you find a way to make it okay. Family members do the exact same thing. They make the exact same thing, and it builds in their denial, their defense mechanisms. I mean, it's a really powerful thing. So, Lynn, as Ed got like older, so let's remove that incident. He comes back home and says, I use cocaine. But as it got older, and Ed shared about some prescription medications, or shared about going to some outpatient facilities, or his treatment episodes, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
At what point were you and the family, you and the loved ones, were you sitting around saying, "Oh my God, like there's something seriously wrong here with Ed's addiction"?
Oh, I mean, right away I knew, and it was just, I saw every day it getting worse and worse. The funny part, he had contacted me the first time that he needed to go, that he said he wanted to go away. And I was like, "You're addicted to what?" And I took him to the emergency room, and then that's when they put him into that state facility thing. It was really a waste. It was a week long. It was a horrible place. There was no follow-up after that. He did go to meetings, and, like, it's funny, he said he didn't get into therapy, but there were a few therapists that, one of them being the psychologist at the school where I worked, I brought Ed to see. Do you remember that, Ed?
No.
In Tom's River, 37. And I would sit, Brian and I, that's my fiance, we would sit out in the car and wait for him. So, I guess he doesn't even remember. So that's really bad. And then you had the other woman therapist on Route 88.
I remember that lady, Molly.
Molly, exactly.
That's the only one I remember.
Okay, so you did go to therapy to try to work out, because last week I'm like, what does he mean he didn't go to therapy?
Yeah, but I would go for like one session and then just never show up again. You know what I mean? It wasn't any length of.
Right, you were always, I don't need this, and
yeah.
And that's a common. That's just so you guys know. That is and all the other family members know. There are stages of change, right? So I'll tell you really quickly, since I have you guys here, the stages of change. Sorry, I got to move the cat. So, the stages of change are, it starts off with this thing called pre-contemplation. And pre-contemplation means that somebody is not even thinking about changing their life around, right? So they're not even thinking about stopping. They're not thinking about working on their traumas, their guilt, their shame, that kind of stuff like that. The next stage after pre-contemplation is this thing called contemplation. So now you're like, wait, I really need to, you start thinking about the problem. I need to start doing something about my addiction. I'm going to reach out to my mom and say, I need some help. I'm going to maybe go to this one therapist and start talking about some of the stuff I've been bottling down for a long time, right? So it's pre-contemplation to contemplation. And then there's this thing called preparation. Now, preparation is you're actually preparing to change your life around. And it seems like in Ed and all those levels, he never got from contemplation to preparation. Preparation is when he gets on an airplane and goes to Texas to go to treatment. And from there, he's preparing what his next stage is going to be. See how the level of planning and the level of thought and the level of commitment starts to increase. Mm-hmm. And that's after the preparation, you go into the action stage, which is you're actually doing things consistently over a period of time, extended period of time, to make those changes that you want in your life. And after the action stage, it goes into this maintenance stage, which is just maintaining the work that you've accomplished. So these stages of change are universal with every change that people do. And you guys really portrayed a really nice way to say, hey, even though he was kind of trying some things, mm-hmm. but it wasn't fully invested or engaged. So I do know the time that it got invested and engaged and was when he decided to go, and you guys live in New Jersey, as we talked about last week, was him to go to an out-of-state facility. He went to a place in Texas, right? Mm-hmm. I believe. And what was that like for your family, Lynn, to say, okay, he's going out of state? What was that like?
Actually, it was great, because further away from Jersey he went, the better I felt. And I felt he was in a safe environment and away from, and his therapist kept in touch with me weekly. So I was able to see and hear about his progression. Then after the 30 days, they suggested he go into sober living, but Ed was like, no, Mom, I want to come home. And I'm like, no, I really think you need to go into sober living. And he was like, oh, you don't want me to come home? And I'm like, oh God, here we go, the guilt. And I'm like, Ed, are you ready to come home? That's my biggest concern is, are you ready? And I knew he wasn't going to be ready after 30 days, not after, everything that I had seen, because in the meantime, I cleaned out his car and there were things that I found in there that I was like, oh my God, In fact, I think Ed had called me and said, when I told you I cleaned out your car, and you were like, well, did you find the needles? And I was like, needles? I didn't find any needle. And you were like, oh, okay, well, guess you didn't, find them yet. And then I
didn't want you to prick or poke yourself, so
Yeah.
I wanted to tell you where they were.
Now, yeah, well, I eventually found them. And but I forgot what I was saying to get to that. Oh,
Well,
I didn't want him, and it's not that I didn't want him to come home. I knew that it was just going to be, he was going to fall again. I just knew that after 30 days, I just needed him in sober living, and he didn't want any part of that.
I'll tell you this, Ed, I remember something you said last week, that when your progression led to drugs that are using, intravenous, you said there's an addiction to needles and all that kind of stuff like that. When you shared about that, you even said firsthand that I never thought I'd be the person doing that. Like, I never thought I'd be that person, all that kind of stuff, right? But, Lynn, but check this out. Lynn, you know how when Ed's first girlfriend came to you and said, hey, Ed, he's sniffing cocaine, and you're like, there is no way my son is.
Mm-hmm.
But then all of a sudden you fast forward the tape like 10 years from that moment, or whatever it was from that moment, 10, 12 years from that moment. And Ed says, Mom, did you find the needles? You're like, oh, I didn't find anything. Then you go in there and you find them. Mm-hmm. That's the progression of this stuff, that like the things, addiction leads us to places that are so, like 10 years before that, imagine if someone would have told you that. You'd have been like, there is absolutely, you would have like, I mean, it would have broken down. But 10 years later, it's like, yep, that's just where it led to. And this is what everyone has to see, that Ed, his mom, these experiences they're having in their lives, were not things that they thought were going to happen. Mm-hmm. This is just when addiction is left untreated, codependency is left untreated. There are no boundaries. People are operating out of places of guilt. People are operating out of places of trauma, of sadness, This is where this stuff leads. And by the way, I'm really glad that your story led to communications in detox settings and treatment settings in moments like this, because the alternative option is one of you guys won't be able to be on the screen to have that conversation because they won't be around anymore.
Yeah. That's
exactly the stark reality of this stuff.
Yeah, that's exactly the point that I got to. And I mean, I actually, and I know this may sound terrible to some people, but I actually got to the point where I would sit on the couch at night when he was out. This was like right before he went away this last time. And I said, I have to prepare myself because I know he's going to die, and I have to be prepared for it now. So I'm getting myself prepared that doorbell's going to ring, and it's going to be a police officer, or it's, I'm going to get a call to go to the hospital that he overdosed. And Brian would be like, oh, don't think like that. It's going to, and I would be like, no, I have to prepare myself now, because I can't even think of it happening without me saying, okay, well, I knew this was going to happen, and I tried telling him, and whatever. And it got so bad. And then that's when I was able to, change the locks on the door, and just know that if I didn't do that, there was nothing else but either jail or death, and
yeah. Ed, I told you I was going to come back to this exact moment. You remember when you said the best thing your mom did for you when you came out of treatment was to change the locks of the house? When you lived in that motel, the Target shopping center, all that stuff you're talking about? Yeah. Your mom changed the locks. Like, you remember you said, I came home, I got to open the door, my mom changed the locks, and looking back, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. Remember that last week?
Yeah, absolutely.
You remember, and I told you that on the flip side of that decision, for your mom to go change the locks, there was an entire journey she went through psychologically, emotionally, physically. She just said the main reason why I decided to make that decision was because I started sitting up in my own house in the middle of the night, awake, contemplating the moment that someone's going to come knock on the door and let me know that you're dead. Mm-hmm. It's going to come tell me that you're overdosed in the hospital. You're not functioning. You're brain dead. And I just didn't want that to happen. So I started to do the one thing I know I could do to control at least my side of it, right? Because only her side of it was to say, here's my boundary. I'm locking the door. So it wasn't as easy as like, hey, let's just go to Walmart and go to the lock person and just change the locks today. It's like, it doesn't happen.
It wasn't like that at all.
It's not like that at all. It's like, let's just look in the phone book and find the mobile lock guy and just have him come. It's like, it's this emotional, psychological breakdown that people go through to get you the moment of saying it's the best thing my mom did. So there's always two sides to the story. But tell me what it's like to hear your mom publicly in front of all these people share about staying up at night, not knowing if you're going to live or die, man.
I mean, it's definitely not a good feeling. It's certainly not something that I'm, proud of at all. And I feel terrible that I put you and the family through that. But the only thing I could do from here on out is make sure that, I don't ever have to put you through that again.
Yeah, man. And I'll tell you this. So for everyone else, just to fast forward the story, Ed, he went back home and then went out of state to Texas. But this time, instead of going back home again, because he said, hey, we can't do what's not working for us. Let's try something different. Right. He took the recommendations of the facility and went to sober living out here in California. And that's where we kind of met him at Buckeye Recovery Network for his clinical component. And, Ed, as he shared last week, again, go back and watch that. He really hit the ground running. He started doing what was suggested to him. It took him a while to open up with the trust component he's talked about, but he finally got there. He became a part of this larger sober community. Lynn was engaged with us, getting weekly calls, weekly updates. She knew Ed was doing well. Despite of the barriers of time, distance, and travel, she felt comfortable in knowing where Ed's at. And Ed even, became one of those kind of paraprofessional live-in house managers, if you will, someone that's managing a group of other people that are just starting the process. So it's kind of like peer leader. And after about 11 months of sobriety, of real sobriety, not just 11 months of not doing substances, of sobriety, Ed had a one-day relapse. And he shared about it last week. It was building up and building up and building up to the point that he didn't reach out, utilize his resources, utilize his support. And the temptation got to him, and he relapsed one time, and he had to go to detox and come back to the program. And I'll tell you guys this, that it's been 14 months since that moment that Ed's been clean and sober. So this isn't, he was able to kind of re-engage. But there's a moment here, the reason why I wanted Lynn to be on this call is about 4 months after Ed's relapse, he was 4 months sober again. Okay, so he just relapsed after 11 months. He was 4 months sober again. I was doing my family education and support groups right here on the same thing that you guys are watching. And I was doing questions and answer series. And I said, if you guys have any questions, feel free to send them to me and I will address them during my talk. And all of a sudden I got an email or a message, something from Lynn that said, hey, Parham, I really appreciate your family education stuff. Our son, Ed, she didn't know I know Ed so well at the time, but she said, our son, Ed, is about 4 months sober right now. Everyone's saying he's doing really well. But for some reason, I just can't trust him right now because of the relapse really took a toll on us. So Lynn, do you remember that?
Oh,
Second, yeah. Second of all, walk everybody else that's watching this. What was it like to hear that he relapsed? And then what was your initial few months like at that time?
My initial feeling was of disappointment. And I think Ed mentioned anger, but I was not angry with him. It was disappointment because he had come so far, and I finally thought, okay, this is the place. I mean, Buckeye and the Ohio House is like the best as far as I'm concerned. And to hear that he did that, and then the story that he told me was different than what he told last week about, how he relapsed, but that's fine. It was just so devastating to hear that. Even like I felt like even this length of time being sober, even being a house manager and having everything at his fingertips, he still did this. So it was more of a disappointment, like, oh God, no, I can't go through this again. I can't go through him relapse. I just can't. I knew I wasn't going to make it anymore. There was no other place for me to go, and no other place for him to go. So, yeah.
Ed, is this match what you thought the feeling was that your mom had after your 11-month relapse?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much, I knew she was super disappointed and the guilt and shame that I had in the relapse and reaching out and letting her know what happened. And, I remember I told my boss at the time, don't mention it to my mother or my family. Like when I get out of detox, I want to be the one that tells her what happened. Mm-hmm. And I remember when I got out, he was like, yeah. And I don't know. So what he said is I had to tell your mother because she called me because your phone was off or she couldn't get in touch with you. And she thought that you died. And she called me and I had to tell her that you're okay and you're in a safe place, but you relapsed.
Right. So that's exactly what happened. I just had this, feeling like as soon as his phone would go straight to voicemail and, or then I'd leave a message and he didn't call me back. The blood just drained out of my body because I knew. I said, something's wrong. He definitely must have relapsed or he's dead somewhere. And it's just a matter of time before that phone's going to ring or that doorbell's going to sound off and somebody's going to be there to let me know.
Yeah. So it brought back. So here's the powerful part about this. Oh. There is, I always share this to the families, Ed. I say addiction is a traumatic process, not just for the individual doing drugs and alcohol. It's traumatic for the family. So anything that's traumatic also creates this thing called post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder, also known as PTSD, is something that anything familiar of the past, anything that sounds like the past, looks like the past, feels like the past, it can bring up in a moment all of the same thoughts, feelings, and emotions one's experienced 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. In a blink. Yeah.
You know what does it for me? Like, like if I hear a song or a certain smell, it could bring me back to 15, 20 years ago. Songs and smells. So I can only imagine, whole scenarios playing out, bringing you back to the same place. But songs and smells are two things that can bring me back to 20, 25 years ago.
Yeah, man. Smell is the most powerful sense that we have in terms of memory, but also sound is interesting. I have pretty much all my grandparents, to be honest, except for my mom's, my dad's mother went through some type of, memory problems, especially my mom's father and my mom's mother. But music, if you ever work with anyone with Alzheimer's or dementia, they say if you play music for them, a song from I'm talking about when they're young, play a song from when they were 20, 25, 15, 18 years old. All of a sudden, even if they can't remember anything, even if they don't know who you are, what your name is, and they've asked you 37 times, who are you? What are you doing here? They can hear the song and they'll know the words, man. They can sing to it. They know the words. It's really powerful. It's actually one of the most beautiful things. I watched this. It was like a 95-year-old lady with Alzheimer's or dementia. They put her in front of a piano, right? I mean, this lady, she was not able to function. They put her in front of a piano, and all of a sudden, she just started playing music. Because the song was just the power of the music. And the last thing I'll share with this, sorry for this total tangent. I'm just really passionate about this because I had family members affected. Was she used to be a world-class ballet dancer, and they played her favorite. They played the song that she was really good with, with the ballet. She knew the dance. All of a sudden, sitting in her wheelchair, she was able to move her hands around as if she was doing the actual ballet, the actual dance, man. Literally with her hands and her movements, and it was just really phenomenal. To the power of in memory. So, thank you guys for that. So let's just get to this part about the 4-month mark, Lynn, that you sent that email to me, right? So at this point, Ed, tell me your first 4 months of your sobriety, so people can get a point of reference of when someone relapses, if they're doing things the right way or they're just re-engaged with recovery. What was that first 4 months like for you? So mom understands, when she reached out to me saying, hey, I don't trust him, to know what was going on in your world, truly going on in your world. What was those first 4 months the second time around like?
It was rough. I think I touched on it last week a little bit. I was beating myself up over the relapse, the guilt and shame. And, I knew that I wanted to be sober, and I knew what I wasn't doing and what I needed to do if I wanted to get any length of sobriety again. But when I first went back, to the house as a client rather than a manager, it was tough. And there were thoughts like, maybe I'll just go use again or do this again. And I didn't. I reached out to my support system that I have, my white picket fence of guys. And, I got right back into it, and I started going to meetings again. And I went to nighttime IOP at Buckeye Recovery Network. And I got a new sponsor, and I started working the steps again. And this was right around the beginning of COVID. It was March of 2020. So things were shutting down. So it was a little difficult to get in-person meetings, but I was doing the Zoom meetings. And, then I actually got COVID, and I had a quarantine for, whatever the hell it was, 14 days, I think, something like that, me and a couple of guys. And, that was difficult because it's like, now I'm not in this place that requires me to be sober, and I'm out on my own. But it was great because it was a good, that even reassured me that, hey, I know I want to be sober. I just did it. And, so I had 4 months of time, and I started thinking about moving out. And, most of the people that I would mention that to told me, it might be a little premature and that I was crazy. And, but like you touched on last week, it's like I didn't lose that knowledge that I had leading up to it. And I knew what I knew what I needed to do in order to stay sober. And that's what I did. And I moved out at 4 months sober. And, I have on the 22nd, I'll have 15 months.
Yeah.
And I moved out with two guys who my roommates are great. Both of them are still sober. Both of them have, I think, right around 2 years. One has 2+, one's right under 2 years. And I stay in constant contact with the guys I look up to in the program, and the guys who, have what I want. But initially coming back, it was rough. But it was one of the better things. And I touched on it last week that I don't like saying the best thing that ever happened to me, because it's hard to say that a relapse is the best thing that's ever happened to me. But it really made me realize that, I'm an alcoholic, I'm a drug addict, and I need to work every single day in order to stay sober, because if I don't, I will drink and I will use.
Yeah, man. So the wound is where the light enters us. So sometimes those pains are the greatest motivators for change, But Lynn, I'll tell you this. So at 4 months, when you reached out to me and you said, hey, I'm not sure if I could trust him, or we're having a hard time trusting him because of everything that happened. Mm-hmm. Did you notice how right now when I asked him what those first 4 months were like, he said I was going through a lot of guilt, a lot of shame. I was going back in the same environment as a client. COVID stuff was happening. I wasn't, I was going through a lot of just emotions and feelings.
Right.
The reason why, when you asked me that question, my suggestion to you and every single family member ever from till the end of time is going to be, you got to take care of yourself, because I can't promise you what will or won't happen with Ed. I can't promise you if people are going to stay sober. All I know is that you have control over yourself and your own recovery and your own boundaries and your own, all that kind of stuff. Like I remember vividly just talking about that answer over and over again, because as you're sitting there thinking about, if he's going to stay sober, can I trust him? Can I not trust him? All that. Ed's going through his own world, his own experience. Like, it has nothing to do with the world and experience that you were going through. He was just thinking about self and how he's going to get through self.
Right.
And if we all learn that all people are thinking about themselves and their emotions at any given time, then we realize how important it is to take care of self. And the hope is that both of you do what you have, by the way, did what you needed to do in the recovery process to create this moment right now, because it's a byproduct of both of your commitments. If it's a byproduct of both of your stands for recovery. And my formula for trust for anyone watching for the first time is committed and consistent actions over time. So 4 months wasn't long enough of committed and consistent actions for Lynn to feel, okay, I can trust him again. Can you let us know, in your experience, how long of committed and consistent actions over what amount of time has it taken, if it's taken, for you to regain trust or gain trust in Ed again and what he's saying and doing right now?
I think it was when I went to visit him last October, and I actually got to see his apartment, see who he was living with. We went out to dinner with a few of his friends, and seeing the old Ed and the Ed that I knew was in there somewhere, but just needed to find himself again. Because, I mean, he's just like a great person, a giving, loving, and funny person. And when I went to California and I visited with my sister and I were like, he's Ed again. Like all of a sudden, look, even hearing him laugh, I remember my sister saying that came from his stomach. And I haven't heard Ed, laugh like that in years. So I think I started to relax a little bit then and kind of said, okay, I think this time, but I always do it, like fingers crossed and praying and whatever. I did see a big difference in him when I went to visit.
Yeah, it's that laughter that really stood out to me. First time they've heard him laugh. Your sister said that in a long time. If I had to guess, I would probably say it's before that age of 14 that we're talking about here, that true laugh, and recovery, again, if anybody's watching this for the first time, recovery is to regain something that's been lost, stolen, or destroyed. And it sounds like Ed was able to regain his himself that was lost, stolen, or destroyed, at the age of 14 when, he went through a big loss for any young man. So that's the beauty of recovery. And Ed, that's, if you notice at the end, she's like, I still kind of hope and pray this and that. So it's like, no, that's okay. That's totally okay. And I probably that even gets better, by the way. It's going to continue to improve as you watch Ed in his next chapter in life. So you just shared, you went and saw his apartment in October. You're like, hey man, he's self-sufficient. He's his own. And
that is a big,
So as of about a month ago, here's another phase in Ed's recovery. About a month ago, we were able to, I've been watching Ed for an extended period of time now. So you add the 11 months and the 15 months, it's 20, that's over 2 years of time here we're talking about, regardless of the one-day relapse. And that's just a part of what we do, and that's okay. We saw that Ed has a lot of talent and a lot of value to the organization, and we waited for 2 years strategically because you're kind of supposed to wait for 2 years in these kind of situations. And we decided to bring Ed on board. I decided to bring Ed on board with a few other people that advocated for him as a part of Buckeye Recovery Network at the capacity of our head of alumni services. So what the head of alumni services is going to do is people that go through our program and family members that go through our program, they can receive phone calls from Ed. So Ed, what's some of your vision that you have in this role? Because you are the right person, right role, right time. I'm pumped to be working with you, dude.
I'm super excited to be working with you and everybody at Buckeye Recovery Network. My vision is right from when these men and women come through the doors, to establish a relationship with them and get to know them on a personal level and be someone that they know and trust and love, and be there throughout the whole, duration of their stay with Buckeye. And then constant communication with them after they leave Buckeye Recovery Network, right? Relapse is a part of my story, and it doesn't need to be a part of everybody's story, but it is a part of mine and a lot of other people. And I want to be able to reach out to these men and women after they leave and do check-ins frequently to check in and see how they're doing. And if they're going out of state, if they're going back home to a different state, help them find resources back home in the state that they're going to, if that looks like meetings, or if we have other alumni in that area, connecting them when they get back and just setting them up for success post-discharge.
Yeah. So Lynn, you locked the door in New Jersey, and now he's running alumni department at Buckeye Recovery Network, which is a pretty big organization.
Locked the door and said, you will never sleep here again.
Yeah. And I'll tell you this, when Ed was 14, 18, 21, 25, you would have never had the psychological, emotional strength to ever do anything like that. But it takes what it takes. There's a question here. Dan is someone that's, he watches this all the time. He had a question for both of you guys. And he said, Lynn and Ed, you are an inspiration. Thank you for sharing your story. I'm visiting my son in California for the first time in 15 months, a 3-day trip. He's 20 years old, in and out of recovery for 5 years, about 70 days sober. Oh man, congratulations, Dan. I didn't know that. That's really wonderful. He's in an IOP program, not Buckeye. Any advice on how to set boundaries or expectations to make the experience positive for both of us? So do you guys have anything to tell Dan?
I think my mother would be the better one for the boundaries.
Oh,
Maybe.
Yeah, the boundaries. It's hard when like setting a boundary for you now that you're in another state. But I would just embrace your son when you're there, love him, praise him, tell him how proud you are of him, and let him know that you will always be there, and let him know that there's always resources and people to turn to in case he ever gets a feeling of, whatever to use again, or, just to take advantage of where he is. Like when I went there, I was like, oh my God, it's so beautiful here. Just the surroundings of California, and the Huntington Beach area, it's just beautiful. And you take in the nature and things that you see. It was just phenomenal when I was out there. It was really nice.
Ed, you got anything for Dan? I'll share a few things for Dan too, but Ed, do you have anything for Dan?
First of all, 70 days is a big deal when people are out there getting drunk and high. So 70 days is huge. Usually the beginning of sobriety is a lot tougher, but just know that, he's still, I guess, vulnerable, and so am I. So just go out there, like my mother said, enjoy the time with him. And I'm really not good with the setting boundaries part. I think Parham will be able to touch on that a little bit, but enjoy the time spent with your son.
Yeah. So I'm first of all, 70 days is a big deal. So my thing is, he's still 20 years old. So we have to age appropriate stuff here. Any 20-year-old with or without addiction problem, usually they're not the best decision makers. But the second thing is for you guys, I know your story, Dan, and Debbie, I know you guys pretty well right now, is when you're coming in, set some expectations for like the time limits that you guys are going to be spending time with each other. So you don't want to keep it open-ended, get a hotel room, just stay there 24/7, all that kind of stuff like that. Keep it like with an all-day thing, but have them go check back into sober living at night, just for accountability. So it's like one thing you guys don't have to worry about, like, oh my God, is he going to use? Is he test? All that kind of stuff. Allow that burden to be on somebody else. And also name off like maybe 2 or 3 conversations that you guys don't want to have during this time. So pick, allow him to say what he wants to talk about, do what he wants to do, like enjoy the heck out of the time you have with each other. But if there's like 2 or 3 conversations that you guys know always leads you guys to somewhere that potentially can cause argument and really ruin these 3 days you have with each other, just say, hey, let's put these conversations on the back burner. Let's have these conversations at another time, because you can actually control the environment and what you want to experience with your son. And so just don't forget your own power that you have in this. And, always get his input onto what are some things that he wants to do with you guys that he might not be able to. Because seeing him for the first time in 15 months, man, I promise you, the same way you guys miss him, he misses you guys too. And I hope to heck you guys have a really good time. Utilize your resources. Reach out to me if you have any specific questions. And hopefully that was helpful. So anyone else? That's cool. Let's go through and see what some of these comments are. And by the way, there's this link that I put. No one's ever taken it up on it yet. I think in the beginning people would. I copied this link. And if you guys look in the comment section, there's like a link at the bottom now. And what you do is when you click on it, it allows you to kind of join the screen. So it'll be like 4 of us on the screen together. It'll be like me, you, Ed, and Lynn, whoever you are. And we'd be able to have a conversation together. So I could do up to 16 people on the screen, but obviously we don't want to do all that. So let's go through here. And there's some people that you guys probably know. I'm assuming, is this one of yous?
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for the support. We got another one here. I think it's one of you guys.
Yeah.
Hi, Cindy.
And the only reason I know these are related to you guys is because I don't know them by name. So it's kind of.
Ray was Ed's like best friend growing up, and Cindy and I were very, very close as well.
Okay. And here's Amanda. Lynn, you're so strong. I'm proud of you. Eddie says, stay strong, continue to do the great work you guys are doing.
Thank you, Anthony.
This is a special shout out for you, Ed. Anytime you get a babe, I'm so proud of you. You know, I'm not going to talk about that one. Good job. Hey, thank you for watching, Jessica. I enjoyed watching you guys' pictures together when they were visiting. Jessica and you guys, I saw those pictures.
Yeah.
Jim said, hey, you're into the solution. Both of you guys are into the solution. So in the recovery program, we talk about you can either be in the problem or you can be in the solution. We've spent way too many days marinating in the problem that in recovery, we don't have time for that anymore. You know, you don't have time to sit in the problem anymore. We got to get into the solution. Let's see. Kathy, you both experienced the same emotions, have been on the same horrible roller coaster. I feel you, girl. Dan came back after you guys made that, said, Lynn, you're making me cry now. So it's kind of a father in your shoes. Yeah, it's the same thing. And I got a shout out, Parham. You're the man. Yes, I am. Thank you so much. I'll take a humble brag. Hossein, which is someone that we have has been actually on this every single week and has got a loved one just like Ed. Thank you, Ed and Lynn, for being a great role model for all of us. We are ready to visit our son who is in recovery, but seems like he hasn't reached the point to forgive the past. So what they're experiencing, by the way, you guys seem like you had a positive relationship throughout. This one, there's a little bit of there's a friction, there's some tension, right? And the family wants to visit the son, but the son is kind of not there fully yet. And so I'm being patient with them. Yeah, I speak to them, once every few weeks, and sometimes it just takes what it takes. Not everybody's recovery is different speeds. Yeah. Sometimes we call it sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, right, Ed?
That's right.
Yeah, and it's really hard to compare recovery. So in the same way, Hossein John, I know of people that the whole first year of their sobriety, the family members never really connected and talked to. I gave you a couple examples of some people that went through the similar programs that we know. It took them a while to get, really comfortable with their family. So just keep doing what you guys are doing. You guys are very committed to this, which is awesome. Debbie, which is the other half, wrote, congratulations, Ed. Sounds like a great role. It's a great role for your alumni stuff. So many will benefit. Thank you, Parham, for amazing advice. Thank you, Lynn, for sharing your strength and courage. You are an inspiration. And the last one, my mom, finish it off there. Lynn, I'm so proud of you. Finally, your tough love worked, and you've been so courageous. You did what was right. And by the way, I had the same thing. My mom gave me that really hardcore. If the door was closed and you're not welcome in this house anymore. I'm like, what do you mean I'm not welcome in this house anymore?
Ed, like, did you change the locks on the door? I'm like, yeah.
This is my house. She had like this. Her eyes were just different the day she told me that. It's just something was different. She terrified me. Cindy gave you guys some love.
Cindy.
Eileen, which is Ed and Lynn, thank you for such courage and great communicators, which is so helpful. Parham, you're a constant in our recovery. Thank you, Eileen, for being here every week also. So as you guys can tell, you shared your experience, strength, and hope. And by default, and you guys know, people watch this on recording, 1 p.m. on a Saturday, sometimes people aren't around to sit and watch us talk, or 10 o'clock in the morning our time on a Saturday. It's not like prime time. So as this is posted on our Facebook page, more families get to go watch it. And your story, which was rooted in a lot of ups and downs and everything in between, all of a sudden becomes a valuable story that gives people hope and inspiration. So that's the best we can do on any given time. What's your one takeaway from all this? And I'll let you guys out of here. Ed, what's your takeaway? And then I'll get your takeaway from Mom, and we can call it a day.
It was just great to be able to do this, the three of us, and get Mom's perspective. And, it's a different perspective, than mine. And it's good to just be able to talk about it and have that relationship. And, just the three of us be out here and doing it. Like Jim said, today we're in the solution. And, right. It's a great feeling.
And Lynn, what's your takeaway?
Just being able to be open with Ed and let him know, and seeing him for the person that I knew he was, compared to the angry, I know it all kind of person. It just, I'm just really, really proud of him and you, Parm, and the Ohio House and Buckeye, and just for all the people that weekly, I'm just so thankful and so proud of you, Ed.
Thank you so much, guys. I really do appreciate it. And next week, for anybody watching, we're going to have a sister and her sibling. How about that? We haven't had siblings yet. So I'm really excited to see what the impact of addiction does on the family unit, and what's it like from the perspective of a sibling to watch their sibling go through the ups and downs of addiction. So everyone have a wonderful weekend. We'll be back same time, same place next week. Love and appreciate all of you. I'm going to end the broadcast.